In Ottawa, Canada's newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney steps into a high-stakes role. As he approaches the stage, greeted warmly by supporters, the weight of the nation's challenges is clear. Carney's leadership comes at a pivotal moment, with U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs and provocative rhetoric threatening Canada's economic stability.
Who's ready to stand up for Canada with me? And I want to congratulate Pierre Poilievre on a hard-fought, fair, good campaign. America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country. Never. But these are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never ever happen.
This is very, very different times. And I think Carney is reacting to that by saying we are holding the line, but we will negotiate. And you can see it's a very business-like manner. And hopefully that will play well. But at the same time, he's not looking to make too many concessions about Canadian sovereignty that would maybe be what is asked for in terms of kind of creating that relationship. I think he's actively saying, listen, we will negotiate and we are going to have these meetings and we are going to do our best, but there is a line we won't cross. And so in the same time, I'm also going to be cultivating all these other relationships because there are these other mechanisms we can use to try and strengthen the Canadian economy at the same time.
We are over the shock of the American betrayal. But we should never forget the lessons.
But you're going to take us forward.
We have to look out for ourselves.
I think that he's going to be turning to Europe and the European Union. And, it's a very different situation. We think about it economically, and then you think about it maybe in terms of defense and other things, right? And geographically, where we are puts certain realities into play. Right. But, Canada's already a part of most international organizations and has been an active participant in these groups. So I don't know that that is going to change rather than maybe deepen and strengthen. And I think what we will see is kind of the economic relationships taking on new life with new agreements.
Prime Minister of Canada, Your Majesty.
Your Majesty.
I think he is largely an unknown in certainly in political circles, right? And as the Bank of Canada governor or as the Bank of England governor, I mean, he had a very different role to play. I think the way he has carried himself through the campaign is calm, relatively, I'd say, efficient in terms of his words and his statements. I think he is definitely putting himself forward as someone who has a plan, who sticks to the plan that he puts together, who is looking for solutions to the problems. I mean, you could see this in the way he answered questions in the debate, right? He's like, here's all the reasons that I'm doing things. It's very much clear that he's used to doing that kind of problem solving. And I think, his rhetorical style wasn't necessarily on par with those of some others, but of course he's not a politician, right? And so it's going to be a steep learning curve, I think, for him. But at the same time, the way he seems to be approaching some of the challenges that Canada's facing, and even how he behaved in his very few days as prime minister before the election was called, right? And just, taking trips to try and talk to people overseas to try and build up new relationships for Canada. I think that gives you a hint of the kind of approaches that he's going to be taking as prime minister again.
Thank you so much.
I mean, he has a lot going on, right? He's going to have a phone call with Trump, I'm sure, very soon. That will start whatever types of negotiations I can imagine. Certainly any kind of negotiations he chooses to enter into with other countries, that will also be on his radar. But at the same time, domestically, we're also dealing with a lot of concern. Obviously, we have a lot of industries that are going to be struggling with the tariffs, and so that's going to have to be on his agenda. The cost of living is very high. It has gone up a lot in the last little while. That is a concern for a lot of people, and that certainly drove a lot of support for the Conservatives, because that was what they were campaigning on for so long. Certainly, housing is a huge challenge right now. The cost of homes and even the cost of rentals, it's making young people, I think, particularly concerned. And so these are going to be the main things that I think he's going to be facing. Like, domestically, how do we fix this? How do we deal with our economy in terms of, losing this major trading partner? How do we help the industries that are struggling? How do we grow our own options moving forward? And then what do we do internationally? How do we reach out to try and bolster our own kind of trade avenues?
So if you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs.
On the one hand, we had Poilievre, who we had been familiar with and who had, been putting forward his ideas and really billing themselves, the Conservatives, as the alternatives to the Trudeau Liberals. And then you had Mark Carney stepping in and saying, well, I'm not Trudeau. And he's got a very different resume, very different background, and in many ways has more, a longer CV or more credentials than Poilievre does to handle economic distress. And at the same time, we have this more existential threat that's happening, given what is going on in Washington right now, that is creating a huge groundswell of Canadian identity and support. Well, Carney's not going to be able to push through whatever policy ideas he wants to, right? He is going to need to seek support from another party in order to maintain his hold and the confidence of the House. This will mean some consensus building, or at least some compromise, I think, with some of the parties. It worked really well for the NDP in terms of policy output in the past, and maybe we will see that again. Of course, the NDP isn't the only other party. There is obviously the Bloc Québécois would be another option.
New housing industry. Vive le Canada. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.